Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, for decades, this particular case, it's really been defined by the spectacle, hasn't it? All the emotion, the headlines clashing, everyone clamoring for a simple answer.
A neat resolution.
Exactly. But today, we're going to try and deliberately set that noise aside. Our mission here is really to move past that public display and do a deep, calm analysis. We're looking at the records, the private testimony, the reports.
Yeah, we're focusing on what we're calling the mechanics of distortion.
Right.
How did the search for truth get so complicated?
Yeah.
Or maybe even, fundamentally derailed? We think it's down to some deeply human factors, trauma, certainly, institutional limits, and just this enormous suffocating pressure from outside narratives, especially the media.
So we're going to try and guide you through the evidence step by step. Look at the contradictions, the details may be overlooked. We'll use a measured, intentional tone, really try to highlight the gaps that still exist.
Absolutely. And the material we're using today, it's custom curated for this deep dive. We've got excerpts from private interviews with the family, detailed police reports, testimony from investigators.
And also reflective commentary from the Ramseys themselves, which is key. It gives you this multi-layered view. You don't just see the crime, but how the whole investigation felt compromised, really, by this fundamental failure of trust.
That's the core issue, isn't it?
It seems to be. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right at the beginning. That foundational breakdown of cooperation.
Well, the initial phase.
Yeah.
It was pretty much defined by this profound immediate struggle. You had law enforcement on one side needing timely, unfiltered info, before evidence degrades.
Right, the clock is ticking.
Exactly. And then on the other side, the family. Well, the sources describe them as immediately adopting this defensive posture, like they were operating under a perceived psychological siege.
And that clash of perception, it's just absolutely critical to understanding everything that follows. You see it laid bare in the records. I mean, in 1998 interview notes, John Ramsey specifically said he believed the Boulder police, the BPD, were out to lynch us right from the start.
Wow.
Yeah. He felt that presumption of guilt just blocked any chance for genuine, open dialogue.
But what often gets missed, I think, is the other side of that coin.
Which is
that the investigators, well, they were simply following established procedure. Detective Thomas, back in his 97 interview, confirmed it. The BPD was following a system, a standard process.
Standard homicide investigation procedure.
Right. They have to apply logical sequences,
right.
Rule out the closest possibilities first. Not because they're predetermined to find guilt, but because they're legally obligated to protect the chain of custody, make sure evidence is sound.
Constitutionally sound, yeah.
But for the Ramseys, maybe understandably, this systematic process just felt like persecution.
And the psychological toll of that perception, it's fascinating when you suddenly see the people who are supposed to be finding justice as an existential threat.
Whether it's real or perceived.
Right, whether warranted or not.
Yeah.
Your higher cognitive functions, they shift. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, it goes into overdrive.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. And this hyperactive state means the prefrontal cortex, the part that handles rational, calm decision-making, precise memory recall, that gets compromised.
And this compromise, that's a crucial mechanic of distortion right there.
Yeah.
The family was operating from this place of intense emotional trauma. That severely limited their ability to give the investigators the calm, rational, chronologically accurate information they desperately needed.
So cooperation didn't just slow down, it changed shape.
It absolutely transformed into this high-stakes negotiation for control. That became the priority, it seems, above almost everything else.
And we can actually pinpoint a specific moment cited in the source material that really seems to have cemented this adversarial stance. John Ramsey talks about the incident where their attorney was told the police wouldn't release JonBenet's body for burial.
Until the parents submitted to formal interrogation.
Right.
And that action? Look, regardless of the legal justification or the intent behind it, it fundamentally resets the relationship. In the family's eyes, the police went from being objective truth seekers to antagonists using their child's remains as leverage.
That's an anthropological catastrophe for an investigation, as you put it. The social contract is just broken.
Totally broken. From that point on, cooperation wasn't just slow. It became highly conditional. And frankly, it feels like it became weaponized.
And then the complexity just mounted exponentially when lawyers got involved. Multiple layers of legal counsel.
Lou Smith, the investigator, who later resigned because he disagreed with the focus on the family. He lamented in his 98 notes that a great deal of time is expended just because simple requests, information, scheduling interviews had to be filtered through multiple attorneys.
It's that catch-22 of conditional cooperation you mentioned.
Exactly. The family felt they needed lawyers to protect themselves from what they saw as a rush to judgment.
Understandable from their perspective.
But those legal safeguards, at the same time, created this huge logistical barrier for the police. It slowed everything down.
And paradoxically, John Ramsey himself expressed deep frustration with it. He said he would love not to have attorneys involved, just wanted to get on with this and figure out who did this. He felt trapped.
Trapped by the need for protection. And that deep distrust, you see it reflected in their demands, too, like requiring a district attorney representative present during interrogations.
They needed an independent observer, always, to ensure, as they put it, the BPD wasn't manipulating things. It shows this deep-seated belief that the police weren't just objective, they might have been malicious.
And Patsy actually detailed one reason fueling that suspicion. She noted police were allegedly contacting friends, asking these targeted questions. Questions designed, she felt, to bias the witnesses against a suspect.
Trying to confirm a theory rather than just gather facts.
That's how she saw it. Her attorney, Patrick Burke, was really emphatic. He said he resents the word that she failed to cooperate. He argued that setting specific protective terms for interaction isn't failure to cooperate. It's necessary self-defense against perceived targeting.
But this conditional cooperation, it creates massive practical problems for forensic criminology, doesn't it?
Huge problems. When that investigative timeline stretches out exponentially,
Right.
Weeks turn into months before crucial interviews happen. Well, memories fade. Alibis might harden, consciously or unconsciously, and critically, physical evidence degrades or gets contaminated.
The public just saw delay, maybe obstruction, but the records show the strategy behind it, this really difficult balancing act between investigative urgency and constitutional rights. And it ultimately just paralyzed momentum.
And this paralysis brings us to the gaps in resource allocation. I mean, this investigation was incredibly expensive when it was active.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty staggering.
The Boulder Police Department reportedly spent something like $1.6 million just in 97 and 98 alone. That's monumental for a single department on one homicide case.
But when a case goes cold...
Exactly. Those budget allocations shift. They have to towards more recent, potentially solvable cases. So the dedicated resources for this case diminish significantly over time. Critical avenues might just remain unexplored because the funding's not there anymore.
And this diminished resource issue, it ties directly into that critical DNA dilemma you mentioned earlier, that philosophical tension in cold cases.
Precisely. DNA evidence, is technically finite. Every single test consumes a bit of the sample.
And in this case, we know there are these minute samples of unknown DNA.
Right. So investigators face this agonizing choice. Do they run new specific tests now? Maybe using newer tech like MVAC, which might need a larger sample?
Right.
But risk exhausting the limited evidence entirely.
Or do they hold back?
Because if they test aggressively now, they might just eliminate the possibility of using some superior, more discriminating analysis that comes along 5 or 10 years down the road.
That's the core of it. If technology advances, say, from the current STR analysis to maybe whole genome sequencing for trace DNA, and they've already used up the sample.
They've permanently closed that door.
Wow.
So this balancing act, weighing the risk now versus maximizing future potential, it continues to stall case resolution even today. It's another powerful mechanic of distortion caused by scientific limitations and the choices they force.
Okay, so as the investigation is kind of lumbering forward through all this legal friction, specific pieces of physical evidence start coming under this intense, almost feverish public scrutiny. And these facts often created these deep inconsistencies with the family's narrative, which just fueled that cycle of accusation. Let's start with one the sources really highlight, the pineapple anomaly.
Ah, yes, the pineapple. What really stands out here is how this seemingly small piece of physiological evidence creates a massive temporal crack in the family's account of the evening.
Temporal crack, that's a good way to put it.
Both prosecutor Mike Kane and investigator Lou Smith, they consistently stressed that the presence of undigested pineapple in JonBenet's digestive tract was an established forensic fact.
A fact that John Ramsey repeatedly insisted directly contradicted their timeline. He said under questioning, quote, "I will guarantee you it was not after she came home. because, he maintained, the child was sound asleep after they got back from the Christmas party.
And this is where the physiological analysis really grounds the discussion. Undigested pineapple strongly suggests it was eaten within, say, approximately 1 to 2 hours before the tragic events.
That's the general window.
That's the general time frame for fresh fruit to remain recognizable in the stomach before real gastric digestion kicks in. So this detail, confirmed by forensic pathology, directly challenged that core narrative point.
Yeah.
That the child was asleep the entire time until the note was found.
Okay, so the pineapple creates this temporal crack. How did investigators approach that? Because they asked the difficult question, right? Does one contradiction like this indicate deliberate deception? Or is it, the known fallibility of human memory under extreme stress?
That's the pivotal point, isn't it?
Right.
The police, following logical procedure, had to treat that contradiction as potential deception. If the timeline is wrong, why?
Makes sense.
But we also have to consider the neurological defense. Memory isn't like a perfect video recording. It's reconstructive. It's severely influenced by stress, by emotion.
So it's possible.
It's entirely possible a parent, maybe carrying a sleeping child late at night, might genuinely not recall a brief period where the child woke up, had a quick snack, went back to sleep. Especially given the immense trauma suffered afterwards. They could easily just excise a brief, mundane event like that from conscious recall.
But the public and the media, they're operating outside those nuances of trauma psychology.
Oh, exactly. They seize on that contradiction as like irrefutable proof of a cover-up. They ignore the known frailties of human memory.
Meanwhile, the police needed to test that fracture point. Which brings us to those high-stakes interviews.
Right. The investigative interviews often seem designed to pressure test these inconsistencies. Prosecutor Mike Cain explained his direct, sometimes challenging approach to John Ramsey. He said it was necessary to play the role that a defense attorney is going to play.
Preparing for the future, essentially.
Yeah. He acknowledged the family would face more scrutiny than a typical victim's family, but he felt those tough, sometimes accusatory questions were essential to expose potential flaws in the narrative and maybe prepare for future defense arguments.
And we also see documented cases of psychological techniques being used. Investigator Tom Haney, in a 2000 interview, apparently used a kind of shock technique. He introduced certain information claims about prior signs of concern, specifically to gauge Patsy Ramsey's reaction. She later described feeling very distressed by it.
Now, this is a standard interrogation methodology, although it's definitely ethically contentious sometimes. The goal isn't just to cause distress. It's to observe the genuine emotional response, the involuntary reaction when someone faces unexpected information or accusations.
Trying to see past a potentially prepared story.
Exactly. It's a way for our investigators to try and gauge if a subject is operating from genuine memory gaps, maybe conscious fabrication or just deeply held belief. The reaction itself becomes a piece of evidence for them to analyze.
But the scrutiny wasn't just on human behavior. It extended deep into the physical evidence, maybe most notably that bizarre ransom note.
Oh, the note, yeah.
Chief Beckner reported the FBI told them they'd never seen a 2.5-page ransom note before. That sheer length right off the bat suggested two things: either genuine psychological disturbance in whoever wrote it, or deliberate, almost theatrical misdirection, something intended to confuse the investigation.
And the length is just the start. The content of the note is linguistically fascinating, too. It has specific financial references, mentioning $118,000.
Which was close to John Ramsey's bonus amount.
Coincidentally, yes, mirrored the approximate amount of his recent bonus. And it included these kind of sophisticated or maybe cinematic phrases, references to a small foreign faction, lines that seemed lifted from popular movies like Speed or Dirty Harry.
Suggesting what? Familiarity?
It suggests either intimate familiarity with the family's finances or maybe a highly performative mindset from the writer, or possibly both.
And then, inevitably, the handwriting analysis became this huge battleground of expert opinion.
Always does in these cases.
John Ramsey noted their hired experts rated Patsy very highly for not having written it, gave her a 4.5 on a scale of 5 for non-authorship, he said.
Right.
Yet at the same time, other sources confirmed the linguistic analyst hired by the state, Donald Foster, initially concluded Patsy did write it, only to then kind of damage his own credibility by publicly walking that back after apparently consulting privately with the Ramseys.
Which just muddies the waters even more.
Yeah.
And the challenge in forensic document examination here, it's immense. It really contributes heavily to the ambiguity.
How so?
Well, when handwriting is deliberately altered or disguised, proving authorship is exceptionally difficult. Forensic analysts often have to look for the absence of significant dissimilarities. That's a nearly impossible standard to meet conclusively when you're dealing with a potentially disguised sample.
So you end up with?
You end up with competing, highly confident expert opinions on this absolutely central piece of physical evidence. And that remains a profound, unresolved point of distortion in the whole case.
You know, one recurring theme that comes up again and again in the sources is the Ramseys' ongoing frustration. Their frustration with law enforcement's focus staying on them instead of really pursuing external leads.
They consistently voice that.
Both John and Patsy expressed wishes, find the person responsible. And John Ramsey specifically called for pursuing external leads multiple times, it's noted in the records.
But here's where we hit a kind of silent gap in the records.
Yeah.
The Ramseys, they hired their own investigative teams, right? Generated their own tips.
Yeah.
The BPD confirms those tips were processed. They used the same methodological rigor, they say, as they applied to all other leads.
So it suggests the police weren't just dismissing external leads out of hand.
It suggests that, or perhaps that those leads consistently failed to meet the evidential standards needed for prosecution. Or, critically, maybe the existing evidence, the note, the pineapple, the DNA, just prevented a full pivot away from the family in their eyes.
That missing piece. The lack of detail on law enforcement's specific response to John Ramsey's pushing for external theories. It raises big questions, doesn't it? Questions about fundamental disagreements on how to interpret the evidence they already had.
Exactly. Were investigators telling him the DNA was too sparse to build a case on an outsider? Were they saying the ransom note just pointed too strongly inward? We don't fully know the details of those internal discussions.
And that unresolved frustration, that gap in understanding, highlights this major chasm in how the investigation was perceived and conducted over the decades.
The complexity of this case was just amplified exponentially by the media ecosystem surrounding it. The whole investigation, it rapidly transformed from, what should have been a methodical inquiry.
Into a public trial.
A cultural phenomenon. And that forced both the family and the investigators into these defensive postures, these image management stances. And that inevitably compromised the objective search for truth.
John Ramsey himself had some really harsh words for it. He called the media a horrible cancer, an entertainment industry that basically dictated their every move.
Strong language.
Very. He admitted hiring media consultants early on was maybe the biggest mistake he ever made, even though the intent, he said, was just to isolate them from the piranhas, try to share accurate, controlled information.
Yeah, but it backfired. From an anthropological view, this is almost a textbook case of collective myth-making. The tragedy became this cultural touchstone, a story people used to process their own deep societal fears about childhood vulnerability, about the perfect suburban life maybe not being so perfect.
And once that initial powerful narrative of parental involvement took hold in the public mind,
confirmation bias just ran rampant.
People unconsciously filter everything through that lens.
Exactly. They look for confirmation that the parents were guilty. They dismiss anything contradictory like the unknown male DNA as irrelevant, maybe contaminated.
Yeah.
And that external narrative, it actively bled into and interfered with the investigative philosophy too.
How so?
Well, Lou Smith, who famously broke ranks with the BPD over these philosophical differences, he explicitly noted that some investigators, in his view, elected to follow a theory and let their theory direct them, rather than allowing the evidence to direct them.
Which is the opposite of how it should work.
It strikes right at the heart of methodical investigation. The ideal process, the objective way, involves iterative hypothesis testing. You develop a theory based on evidence, you test it rigorously, and crucially, you have to be willing to abandon or modify it if new evidence contradicts it.
But if investigators lock onto a working theory too early,
the risk of confirmation bias becomes extremely high. You subtly prioritize evidence that fits your theory, you diminish evidence that doesn't. And this mechanism of distortion, it seems it led to profound professional divisions even within the BPD itself. It created this internal rift where evidence was interpreted based on which theory an investigator already leaned towards.
So let's try and detail the evidential challenges for both of the main competing theories, because they really highlight the gaps that fuel all this endless speculation.
Okay.
The intruder theory. It faces multiple serious hurdles, right? You've got the lack of definitive signs of forced entry specifically tied to that night.
A big one.
The intruder would need intimate, specific knowledge to the house layout, the family schedule, John Ramsey's exact bonus amount for the note.
Very specific details.
And then there's just the sheer risk involved in composing that lengthy 2.5-page, almost cinematic ransom note inside the house after committing the crime. It seems incredibly risky.
Extremely risky. But then, conversely, the theory of family involvement also has to contend with significant unyielding challenges.
Such as
complete lack of any prior history of violence within the family.
Yeah.
Decades now of consistent denial from both parents while they were alive. The absence of a clear, logical motive that really fits the specific, unusual method of the crime.
And the DNA.
And, most critically perhaps, the persistent, unexplained presence of unknown male DNA found on the child's clothing and body.
Yeah.
Neither scenario intruder or family involvement easily explains the totality of the physical and circumstantial evidence without requiring some substantial stretching of credibility.
And that shadow cast by the media, it also took this profound private psychological toll on the family, which only seemed to deepen that adversarial relationship with the police.
Absolutely. Burke Ramsey, years later, he described seeing his picture plastered everywhere on tabloids as a chaotic nightmare. Said it forced him to become a very private person.
Understandable.
And Patsy's reaction. It speaks volumes about how intense that public condemnation felt. She actually removed the television from their home, stopped reading newspapers entirely. She recalled commentators just inciting audiences to crucify him.
Wow.
It wasn't reporting anymore. It was a public spectacle, a kind of cultural execution, turning their private grief into public entertainment, which just exacerbated their trauma.
And John Ramsey framed the investigation itself, not just the crime, but the investigation as a secondary source of deep pain.
That's a powerful phrase.
It is. From the investigators' viewpoint, presumably they were just professionally pursuing justice, doing their jobs. But from the family's perspective, they were victims being re-victimized by the justice system's relentless, narrow focus.
And that profound difference in perspective is another critical mechanic of distortion. It fundamentally obscured the investigator's professional duty behind the wall of the family's emotional anguish and perceived persecution.
We should also touch on how this external narrative seemed to contaminate even a formal legal process, leading to what you called the grand jury paradox.
Right. Grand jury members reportedly expressed immense frustration. Why? Because information that was widely circulating in public, all the media speculation they'd inevitably absorbed, wasn't being presented in the official proceedings.
They felt something was being hidden.
Possibly. Or maybe they just couldn't reconcile the public narrative with the legal one. This shows that narrative contamination really powerfully. The prosecutor faced this serious difficulty. Managing the boundary between what the law demands, legally admissible evidence, verifiable facts, actual witness testimony, and the public speculation that was saturating the jurors' minds.
So the media's influence compromised the legal insulation of the process itself.
It seems it did. The law requires evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to indict. But when the public believes they already know the truth, based on emotionally charged, often inadmissible media reports, they often conclude the legal system must be failing them somehow, failing by not confirming their predetermined media-driven narrative.
And that tension between legal rigor and public certainty.
It's perhaps the most enduring legacy of all the distortion we've talked about. Creates this cultural wound that just refuses to heal, partly because the legal outcome, whatever it might be, could never fully satisfy the public's appetite for a simple, clear resolution. Hashtag outro reflection and the ambiguity trap.
So we've tried to meticulously explore these mechanics of distortion today. That compromised cooperation rooted in that deep clash of perception right at the start. The intense, often misleading scrutiny of ambiguous evidence of a pineapple, the bizarre ransom note, and the just overwhelming impact of the media ecosystem creating that pervasive confirmation bias.
And what the evidence tells us today? Well, it remains defined by profound ambiguity, doesn't it? DNA evidence exists that doesn't match the family, yet its significance is still intensely debated. Is it the perpetrator, or is it just irrelevant touch DNA from manufacturing, or some other innocent contact?
No consensus.
No consensus. Contradictory conclusions on the ransom note authorship persist, fueling skepticism on all sides. We're left with this collection of powerful, yet often contradictory, facts that still refuse to form a single, undisputed picture of what happened that night.
And the final tragedy here, it isn't just the initial awful loss, it's the decades of unresolved pain, compounded by this powerful cultural demand we seem to have for stories with clear heroes, clear villains, satisfying resolutions.
Yeah, reality, especially in complex forensic cases like this one, Cases derailed by early failures of trust. It rarely provides that neat certainty we crave.
So what's the critical lesson here for us, the observers?
I think it's the practice of intellectual humility. Recognizing the limits, the finite limits of what can actually be known for sure, and rigorously resisting that temptation to fill the evidential gaps with our own emotionally satisfying assumptions or sensational narratives.
Being comfortable with ambiguity.
Exactly. If we can pursue truth with greater awareness of our own biases and understand the complex human factors that can derail an investigation, maybe future cases can be protected from this level of complication.
Which leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. We really have to ask, how does our societal demand for certainty actively compromise the fragile, messy search for truth? Does it maybe lead us to overlook essential missing pieces precisely because they lie outside our preferred narratives?
When we insist on certainty, what important subtle facts might we be choosing, consciously or unconsciously, to ignore?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex mechanics of investigative distortion. We'll see you next time.